Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am with Steve Clifton, owner and winemaker at Palmina Winery. It's really exciting to have Steve here. We've been trying to do this a long time. I am a big fan of his wines and a super talented winemaker. We're sitting in his tasting room here in Los Olivos in the charming town in San Ynez Valley. That's in Santa Barbara County, just a few 40 minutes north of Santa Barbara. But Steve, welcome, and tell us about Palmina.
Thank you. We've only been trying to do this interview for about 4 years, so it's nice to finally get down to it. But I started Palmina in 1995, and Palmina is exclusively dedicated to Italian varietals, and more specifically, dedicated to Northern Italian varietals. And what happened is early on in my life, through travels, my sister lived in Northern Italy, and then subsequent friends and different trips, I realized there was a real similarity in the climate between Northern Italy and the Central Coast, or specifically Santa Barbara County, growing areas. And while there's a huge similarity between the two, they're for completely opposite reasons.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder if you can expand on that.
Absolutely.
I'm curious.
You know, when you're in Piemonte or in maybe Friuli or in Trentino Alto Adige, everything about the climate is really it's forced by the Alps, being always present, and a lot of the weather and climate being a little bit different, but all of the weather being generated by the Alps, and so there's always this huge cooling influence that comes from the Alps, and then that fights or just kind of battles with this warming influence that comes up from the Mediterranean through the Tyrrhenian Sea. It starts, the two forces start hitting each other, right where these great grape growing regions are, and they kind of combat each other. And so here in Santa Barbara County, we have a unique situation where the mountain ranges from Alaska to the tip of Chile all run north and south, except in this one unique place, Santa Barbara. And everybody's seen the map of California, and there's kind of like a little elbow that California has at Point Conception, where the coast juts from west to east abruptly, and all of our mountain ranges open up east to west instead of running north to south. And so we get all of this Pacific influence, but it's a cold Pacific influence that's from an Alaskan current, and it's forced into our valleys. And our Central Valley creates that warming influence. So where the sea is the warming influence in Northern Italy and the mountains are the cooling influence, it's sort of opposite for us.
Mm-hmm. But you still have that thing meeting in the middle, and then the fog and the cool.
Exactly.
Interesting. I love the kind of transverse mountain range here, but I've never really thought of the parallel in a different way. Yeah. So back to Palmina. Mm-hmm. You're focused on Cal-Italian varieties, and you're sourcing your fruit. Where do you own any vineyards? And are you sourcing fruit? I
took a different direction early on, while I was a part of brewer Clifton, we did the same. But with Palmina, I've always taken on long-term leases on existing vineyards, grafted them over when necessary to the varietals that I wanted, and then I use my own farming team. But what it's allowed me to do is, instead of sinking all my capital into one piece of property and sort of being limited to what the microclimate of that one specific place would be, I have 4 different sites that are all in slightly different microclimates, and I can kind of manipulate that as far as where varietals are grown and that sort of thing.
Wow. And what's your total case production?
I do right at about 10,000 cases of Palmina. Yeah.
And just on a quick side note, you also have another label, Lavoie, just to mention that, which is where you do more of your Pinot and
Chardonnay
and Syrah.
Yeah, it's Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Syrah exclusively, yes.
Yeah, so you're also doing what's typical in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. and you know, what I've done for, I started Palmina in 1995, and I started Brewer Clifton with Great Brewer in 1996. And so, I've been making Italian varietals under Palmina for a little over 25 years, and I've been making Chardonnay and Pinot Noir from the Santa Rita Hills district for a little over 25 years as well. And I love continuing that tradition.
I love it. And your wines, the Palmina wines, what markets are they available in?
That's kind of funny because I over the years, at one time I had Palmina in 28 different states and 5 different countries, and was traveling, more than 2/3 of the year. And when my second son was born, I decided that life's about something besides traveling, because I had a project at the time in Argentina and one up in Walla Walla, Washington, and so I was just traveling too much.
I told you he's a busy guy. This is why we never get to sit down.
But after my second son Roman was born, I decided to kind of minimize the amount of travel that's necessary, and so I picked really specific markets that intrigue me and I like to go to, and so New York has always been a favorite. My family is from Texas, Oklahoma, that sort of that part of the country, and so I've always maintained those markets. Las Vegas, because I have a lot of friends that are chefs, and I get to visit them and see everybody when I'm there. And Hawaii, because
why not?
Because it's Hawaii. And then obviously California is our main market, and so I spend the majority of my time as far as marketing to a specific market, like here in my home state.
And you had said your sister had lived in Italy, and that was what sort of inspired you. But what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Wow, that's interesting. My first memory relevant to wine. Well, I think I have to start by saying that I come from a strict Southern Baptist background, and so it was never in my home, and I didn't learn it from my parents. My first memory is from being introduced to some really exquisite German Rieslings by my high school girlfriend's parents, and I'll leave them anonymous just for child alcohol laws, but anyway, they really turned me on to some fantastic wines, and also they turned me on to, I think, an attitude towards wine and how I believe it should be enjoyed, which is at the table, and alcohol has a lot of fun benefits and all that sort of thing, and we all enjoy it. But I think that wine specifically is best enjoyed with a meal.
Oh, I'm gonna hit you up on that question, on that topic in a moment. So being introduced to German Riesling is not a bad way to have a first memory of wine. And you have drunk a lot of phenomenal wines in your lifetime so far. Is there one wine that was sort of an aha moment, a particular wine that either set you on your path or was one of those awakening things? And what was it? And what was the circumstances?
It was, as a matter of fact, there was one. And it wasn't one that I would have, that I would have expected it to be. It was a bottle of 1985 Mossy single vineyard Amarone. And I'm trying to remember the vineyard right now. But I remember the context of trying it. And it was a single vineyard Amarone, 100% Corvina from Mezzano Vineyard. And what was interesting is the wine just stopped me. Like, it stopped me in my tracks, and I thought, well, this is what wine could be. And there have been countless other wines, from DRC and from Oprion is a real favorite of mine, non-Italian. And there are Barolos that I can point to that have changed my life, along the way. Mm-hmm. But that was the first time that I stopped and I had no argument, And what I mean by that is, like, a lot of times people will see the price tag on a bottle of wine, and, if something is $350 or $450 or more, it's like, could a wine ever be worth that? And it was the first time where, my mind went, oh, that's worth anything that you have to pay in order to try that, because life wouldn't be complete unless you try that. And what's really fun is, while I had a project down in Mendoza, Argentina, I got to be really close friends with the head enologist for Masi, and he was going back and forth between Alto Adige, or Veneto, yeah, sorry. Between the Veneto and Argentina, and we became as close as brothers, and I got to share another bottle of that wine with him over in the Veneto.
Mm. So here's a question for you, and I don't know if this is a simple one, but who, of all the populations around the world, who do you think drinks the best in terms of quality?
That's interesting, because I think that, immediately everyone's first thoughts go to France and Italy. The populations, I think, drink more wine than others, but like I alluded to before, I think there's a certain attitude towards wine that makes it more interesting, because I think in Italy, wine is less exalted in general. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are exalted wines. There are fantastic Barolos, Barbarescos, and super Tuscans, and and Amarones and things like that are exalted. But in general, wine is just meant to be
on the table,
and consume as a part of everyday conversation, and I think that's what makes it different, is that wine is part of conversation, and it creates conversations create memories.
So
Italy is my answer to you.
No, and fair enough. And then, of course, because I know that you are a wonderful chef, I've had the pleasure of eating your pizzas before. I haven't tried your other food, but how do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you think there are rules to follow? Do you follow the rules, the old adage of white wine and fish, red wine and meat, or do you take a different approach?
I don't follow any of those rules. I think what I would far rather contrast than compare. Like if you're going to eat something really rich, like lobster with butter, I'm not looking for a big bottle of Chardonnay to compare with it. I think that becomes overwhelming. And so I'm typically looking for, if this is a fatty thing, like a beef braised in Barolo, and I'm looking for something high acidity, high tannin. What I'm looking for in wine pairing is something that accentuates the flavor of the food, cleanses your palate, and the food is accentuating the flavors of the wine, But to do that, for me, you have to constantly be cleansing your palate and readying yourself for the next bite. And so if you're overwhelming yourself, if you're getting more bombastic, then there's never that chance to reset, And so that's what I'm always trying to do with food and wine pairings is find something that's gonna create that cleansing equilibrium.
Mm-hmm. So as a wine drinker, red, white, or rosé?
Early on in my wine drinking career, wine drinking, wine making, whatever, I was drinking, I'd say 75% red wine and to 25% white wine. And as I've gotten older, I'd say that's completely swapped. And I drink probably 75 to 80% white wine now. and the rest red. There are situations where red's just appropriate and best, but I think that white wine is overlooked, and for me, tannins and histamines, I don't know if it's just a buildup over time, but they affect me more than they did when I was younger, and so I save those opportunities for something really, really great. But also, I want to come back to the fact that I started out by tasting some fantastic Rieslings and things like that. And along the way, there was some Liebfraumilch and some other things that were possibly not as great. But I think that people, get turned on to wine with things like Riesling, and then I think they return to those things when they're kind of, after they've gone through an evolutionary arc with their wine, with their tasting and knowledge. I think that they're great wines to start with, and I think the greatest versions of Rieslings might be the apex of where wine can go.
So on that note, do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Well, if I was going to select one variety that I think is distinguished above all the rest, it would have to be Nebbiolo. And the reason for that, there are lots of reasons for that. But my main reason for that, if you look at the spectrum of flavors and aromas that are available, for each varietal, I think that Pinot Noir probably stands out as having a really quite a broad spectrum of both flavors and aromas. And, I think that when you add something as noble as Cabernet Sauvignon, that it kind of broadens that spectrum to some darker things and some earthier notes and flavors other than wine. But I don't think that any varietal offers as complete and broad of a spectrum as Nebbiolo can. And so, if you're talking about, without trying to sound cliche, if you're talking about everything from rose petals to tar, and literally everything in between, there's no other varietal that could possibly express that complete of a spectrum, that broad of a spectrum of flavors and aromas.
So if we were to go into your cellar, what kind of wines would we find? I mean, I'm taking a guess there'd be some Nebbiolo in there.
My cellar, I think it's probably skewed because I have wine around all the time. So the things that I keep and collect really mean a lot to me. They come from friends, producers that I've gotten to know over time. Because I think that for everyone, wine is so much more special when it has an attachment, when you have an attachment to it, when it has a story, and just like the things that I like to hang on my walls in my house, I would rather not just buy something to be decorative. I'd rather it be from a place that I've been, or be a gift from a great friend, where there's a story behind it and there's a meaning for it being in your home. And I think wine is the same way, when the story behind the person who produced it, or the circumstances that you bought it or brought it into your life, then it means so much more than it just being a bottle of wine. So those are the wines that I have, things I've traded with friends, things that I've purchased just because I, admire the person that made it, that sort of thing.
Is there anything you opened recently that drank really well?
I opened, it was a gift from a dear friend, Raj Par. He had given me a birth year bottle, a 1964 Barolo, and I opened that with my dear friend, Toby Rowland Jones, and it was, our birthdays are 2 weeks apart, and we opened it in the middle between our two birthdays, and it was as close to perfection as any aged Barolo I've ever had. It was, I didn't expect as much from a 64 as I would from a 71, but it completely went past any expectations.
Well, see, it aged as well as you are.
Better for sure.
So, for somebody who hasn't tasted Palmina yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
Well, I think that a lot of people have preconceptions about California wine in general. Mm-hmm. I think specifically they have a lot of preconceptions about Italian varietals grown in California. And I think what they're probably missing out on are wines that are made specifically for the table. They're not high in alcohol, that are not overtly fruity. They're definitely not over oaked. Mm-hmm. They're wines that really rest upon characteristics like acidity, tannin, freshness of fruit, that sort of thing. But made in a style where the grape really gets to express itself. Mm-hmm. At Palmina, I strive to never add anything to the wine that didn't come from the vineyard. I do all natural fermentations. I use trace amounts of SO2, but the wines are as naturally brought up as they can possibly be.
So if space aliens were to land on your property right now, which of your wines would you want to present to them?
Well, everybody wants Pinot Grigio.
That's what I'm drinking.
It's probably the best way to introduce new beings to what I'm doing, And the crazy thing about see how I segued into Pinot Grigio. The crazy thing about my philosophy with Pinot Grigio, and you're having some, so you can tell me whether you agree or not. Pinot Grigio is the closest mutation or cousin, if you will, to Pinot Noir, and there's no reason why it shouldn't have all the same noble characteristics and attributes, of the Pinot family. Mm-hmm. I think people forget that Chardonnay is really Pinot Chardonnay sometimes, but just all mutations off of this one noble grape, Pinot Noir. And so with Pinot Grigio, I have strived since 1997 to make Pinot Grigio that is more than a cold glass of water with a squeeze of lemon in it. It's something that really shows the Pinot character and a more sort of robust body and style to it.
Well, I smelled the wine, of course, when you gave it to me, but since we're talking, I'm more enjoying it on my palate. And it's got a lot of texture, a long finish. I can still taste it. Beautiful mouthfeel, not what you would think of Pinot Grigio. If you have the stereotype of water with lemon in it.
Yeah. No, exactly. And so, I think when those aliens land, I think that a nice cool glass of Pinot Grigio is probably what they're going to need after a long travel.
Yeah. And a good introduction. Mm-hmm. So curious, I know this comes a little out of left field, but what's your opinion? This is my one, controversial question for you.
Okay, here we go.
What's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
Oh, I have enjoyed some phenomenal ratings and scores and write-ups and accolades over my 30 years in the wine industry, and I'm really grateful for all that. And more than the scores and all that, over the years, as controversial as he may be, I developed a real friendship with Robert Parker, and in every way looked forward to seeing him once a year. And I regret that I don't see him often now. Mm-hmm. But as things kind of evolved and changed, I think that there are so many more voices, and that's what I've always wanted. There's so many more, people that are, writing a blog or reviewing wines in different ways, and writing or talking about wine in different ways. And I think what it's allowed is for more people to have their own opinions, and for many years, kind of pre-internet and all that, I think that the majority of wine buyers were just listening to a very small number of voices and allowing those people to set their opinion. And I think that that the world of wine has broadened a lot because there are more voices.
And to what you were saying, so much is about a story, and I think that's
exactly.
You know.
Yeah, and I think that there's a far greater spectrum of styles of wine too. And I know here in Los Olivos, some of the most popular wines, some of the most popular tasting rooms are ones that are making fresh wines, natural wines, long skin contact wines, orange wines, and I love seeing the world open up to people where it's not just a kind of a universal world style wine that's big, broad, bold, high alcohol, like there's more like wine for every seat, now.
Well, you've just come off, or you're in the middle of another vintage, been harvesting. We know that a vintage tells a story, and every vintage is a little bit different. But do you find here more similarity from year to year, or more differences? How much variation does vintage play for you here?
That's a great question, because I would say for the first maybe 20 years of my career, we were looking for difference, and we were really trying to find what vintage variation was. There always is vintage variation, and it may be, in the form of drought, or, the end of a drought. It may be in, cooler growing seasons or more moderate growing seasons. It might just be a heat spike. But I would say in the last 10 years of my career, there's been far more variation. And it seems as though there's where the real differences are not where people would look for them to be. They're usually in the winter to spring changes. And there's been a lot of years where we've had later frosts in April, and those kind of destroy a lot of the early buds that come out, and that changes how much fruit is going to be on each vine. Our water has been a little bit more erratic. We're not in a set cycle right now of either drought or rain. It's kind of a mix between the two. And then there are, this October, this year, 2020, October has seen some 100 plus degree days, here in San Ynez Valley, and that's atypical. Exactly.
Well, are there any signs or predictors or omens that you look for that will help you kind of set what a vintage is going to bring you?
No. But my father owned a trucking company for over 50 years, and he hauled predominantly produce. And so produce coming from California, because California is one of the major, food sources for the United States. I think 75% of the produce comes from California. So my father watched trends. So although there are deviances and changes that are pretty obvious, there are also really set cycles. And even within things possibly becoming more extreme, there are still these 10-year cycles that are really obvious. And I can look back over my 30 years and I can see those 10-year cycles. And that hasn't changed. It's just that, it being 111 in October is pretty extreme. Yeah.
Have in your 30 years, have you set up any sort of good luck rituals that you do at the start of harvest?
Well, for years I did the, grow a beard during harvest thing. This year,
now you just keep a beard.
Exactly. Now I just keep a beard all the time. This year I decided not to cut my hair till harvest is over. Maybe later after that, I don't know. But I'm really fanatical about sanitation in the winery, and so I think that cleaning at the beginning of the day and cleaning at the end of the day allows you so much freedom, because you can experiment with things without the possibility of, with less possibility of something going in a strange direction. If you maintain that sanitation all the time, then you can allow things to go in a wilder direction. And so my superstitious rituals all have to do with cleaning. I know that's really boring, but that's just the way it is.
Well, but it's still a ritual and a superstition, exactly. So if it works for you. When you go into the vineyards, you have a long relationship with each of these vineyards because you have a long lease on them. What's your relationship with the vines? Do you talk to them?
I do, and I try to play music for them as well. And I think what really solidifies the relationship the best, I'm gonna digress for a moment. People talk a lot about sustainability, right? And people don't talk nearly as in vineyards. They talk about sustainable, growing of vineyards. They don't talk about human sustainability as much, And the vineyard crew that I have, we've worked together since 2005, so it's our 15th year. Everything that we're working on now, they have either planted or grafted, or they're a part of every piece of the puzzle. Like the same crew in the same places for 15. We've had 3 people turnover, and it's all because they got married, and it is never. We haven't had a situation to fire someone or someone leave. It's all just been evolution, But I think, when the same people are pruning, that are shoot thinning, that are leaf pulling, that are harvesting, and when you have people that are, when people are singing in the vineyard while they're working, and if everyone's happy enough to continue on, I think that makes a huge difference.
And it translates over to the vine.
Exactly.
And then, of course, I'm sure you play music in the winery.
Of course.
Big music
Absolutely.
guy.
Music is a constant. And, when I moved into a new facility in 2015, literally before I put any of the tanks in, before I moved any barrels, I had to get the stereo all hooked up. It has to be the first order.
So when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Wow. Musician.
And you did work in the music industry, right?
I did. My first career was in the music industry, and I had a fantastic time, and I enjoyed it more than I should have. And and then I went into the recording industry and became really disillusioned. And I
when you were in the music industry, you were a musician. You are a musician.
Performer first, yeah, and then I decided not to be a performer and to go to the recording industry, and I found it less to my taste. And over the years of being a performer, I'd worked in lots of restaurants, and I came to wine as a way to raise my tip averages, really first. And then I fell in love with it because I started learning the history behind it, and I love history. And so I had this feeling that the creativity behind winemaking would fill some of the same holes that music performance did. And I was right. There's a real similarity between them.
Do you have a favorite band or musician?
Oh, David Bowie's gone. So, no, I love listening to new things and always trying to stay, up on what's coming out and all that. But no, my tastes are so varied that over the course of the day, honestly, I'll listen to everything from classical to blues to grunge to classic rock. I mean, it's all over the spectrum. So for me, a favorite is just like wine. who am I with? What are we eating? And what's the conversation about? And music's the same way. It kind of runs
it's all about a mood. When you're not working, how do you spend your free time?
Surfing with my boys, and playing music, and
Cooking,
yeah, cooking for sure. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite sports team? I mean, I know you're a Texan at heart. I don't know.
Well, it's really funny. It's strange. I played 8 years of football. Living in Texas for part of my childhood, and then all the way through high school. And the last game I played was the last game I really watched. And now what's strange is I'm pretty deficient of the sports gene. I love individual sports. And like I said, my boys and I are surfing all the time. My boys are playing football now, and so that's reintroduced me to it. And I was a fanatic, and I watched everything, NFL when I was playing football, and I had all the posters on my wall and bedspreads and all that kind of stuff. But no, when I stopped playing, I stopped watching. It was weird.
So if you were planning a romantic evening, what sort of wines would you be opening up to set that mood?
Well, champagne. I mean, no two ways about it. Romance starts with bubbles for me. And so, again, wine is so specific to the situation. Are we having this romantic encounter on the beach? Are we having it in a restaurant? Are we having it in a home? Are we, are we surrounded by other people that we don't care about? Or, what's the situation? But bubbles transcend, so that has to be the first order of business.
Of course. When you look back at your career, and I mean, you have a long future ahead of you, and you're a busy, busy guy because you make wine for other people and you make wine for restaurants, and I mean, you're busy. When you look back at everything you've accomplished, is there one thing that stands out, one of your proudest achievements, other than your sons? Because I know that they are your number one proudest achievement, but what do you look back and say, wow,
I think that's twofold for me, because I'm proud that that Palmina actually proved a lot of people wrong. A lot of people, that said that Italian varietals won't work in California, and a lot of different producers that were making Italian varietals, abandoned ship a long time ago. And so there's a real pride that I have in having sort of stood the test of time. But maybe even more so than that was building brewer Clifton and being in a partnership of two co-equal winemakers and maintaining that relationship and friendship for 20 years, and building that business far beyond either of our expectations or dreams. But just having, it's not a normal model. Palmina's not a normal model. Brewer Clifton was never a normal model.
And yet two great successes.
Yeah. And so it's just doing things outside of the box, and sort of proving to people that they could be done.
Well, on a quick aside, I remember a couple of years ago being at an event with you and having, I think it was the 2014 Nebbiolo that you make. I think it was 2014. And I had a glass and I was talking to an Italian producer and I said, oh, try this. And they're like, ooh, where's it from? And I said, guess. And they started guessing a bunch of Italian producers. I go, it's from California. And they could not believe it.
Yeah, no, that's been amazing. I've been involved with a group called Nebbiolo Grapes, and they have conferences in northern Italy, either in Alba, sometimes in Sondrio up in Valtellina area. But we do it every 2 years, and producers of Nebbiolo get together and we get really concentrated on what are the the new achievements in production and that sort of thing. But we also get together and just talk about what an interesting, strange, rare grape it is, and how heartbreaking it can be in a lot of ways, and how really fulfilling it can be when it's great. But what's been interesting is we always do a tasting that's open exclusively to the producers. So there's no journalists, there's no pressure from outside. Mm-hmm. But each time out of 150 different wines that are tasted, we've always been in the top 10. And that to me is better than any writer, any point, any score that I could possibly achieve.
Absolutely.
Is to be, is to get that kind of recognition from my peers.
Uh-huh. So when you think back to your career or in your life, is there a piece of advice that you carry with you that defines kind of how you live your life or how you work? And what is it, and who gave it to you?
Well, if it's advice that I'm going to give to someone else, don't get in the wine industry.
That was my next question.
But if it's advice that people gave to me, Luciano Sandrone told me one time, he said, the market is going to go up in a hill, and then it's going to come down to a valley and back up to a hill. And he said, if you chase it, you're always going to be behind it, and you'll never catch it. If you do a straight line, always sticking to your principles, then your line will hit it as it goes up, your line will hit it as it goes down, it'll hit it as it goes up, it'll hit it as it goes down, and you'll be able to maintain. And so that's been my focus with my career.
Worked 30 years, so. You talked to me about a wine with table. A table with wine on it. Right. So now I have a question. Fill in this sentence. A table without wine is like?
Oh, it's a day that, where nothing happens that's going to be memorable. It's just going through the paces, it's, with wine, there's the opportunity that a memory is going to be made.
So speaking of memories and things like that, if we were sitting at a table right now in a restaurant and your wines are on the table, there are Palmina bottles sitting in front of us, and the paparazzi are outside, very excited because they cannot believe who is drinking Palmina wine. From any walk of life, living or deceased, who do you wish you could share a bottle of Palmina with?
Sophia Loren, if we could be, 40 years ago and alone would be my first choice.
Perfect. Okay.
Raquel Welch would have to do if Sophia wasn't around, but then it's a different time frame. It'd be 30 years ago. Well, in your perfect world, it would be today with today's wines, but the women from 30, 40 years ago. But you know what? I'd be just as happy if Sophia Loren came in today and had a glass of wine with me.
So, you think we'll still be making wines in 500 years?
Oh, for sure. For sure we will be. Wine's been around for at least 10,000 years. And, I think the first thing that people can point to is Noah got off the ark and planted vines, So wine is always going to have its place, and I think that it's always going to ebb and flow, whether it's an artisanal beverage or it's a commercial beverage. Mm-hmm. And I think that pendulum, swings back and forth in a pretty regular cycle. As soon as it becomes a little bit too commercial, then it really opens the door for artisanal things to be done. Yeah.
If you were, if you were sent to a desert island or off to outer space, and you could take 3 wines with you, what would they be?
Well, I would definitely take some Friuli and white.
Okay.
And I'm going to have to narrow it down to being Friulano. Mm-hmm. And being from somewhere around Butrio that it was grown.
Okay.
Would be one of my favorite things. I would have to have a bottle of 59 Obrion just to show what other creatures that's possible. Right? And then finally there'd have to be Barolo, because your senses need to be completely awakened, and so there'd have to be a great bottle of Monfortino.
Okay, well, now it's time for a little game we play with Wine Soundtrack. And you're sort of a shoo-in for this because it's pairing wine with music. And luckily we're talking about Palmina because, as a side, your Pinots and Chards and Syrahs from Lavoie are all named after songs inspired by it, and the labels are. But with Palmina, it's not as easy a shoo-in.
True.
So, what would you want to listen to? What does it make you think of, this Pinot Grigio that we are enjoying?
Pinot Grigio, I immediately think of, this is very un-Italian, but of like bluegrass, and something a little bit more trebly, like things that include mandolin and guitar and banjo and fiddle and things like that.
Okay. What about your Dolcetto?
Dolcetto is a little bit more sultry, and I think that Dolcetto would definitely go best with jazz. So it would have to be something Coltrane.
And then you have a Rosato that I have at home that I drink. What about your Rosato?
Rosato, that's something sunny, That's something, I want to think about, like, I'm going to go Beach Boys. Yeah, and I grew up listening to a lot of Beach Boys. Yeah.
And what about your Nebbiolo?
Nebbiolo is, I'm going to go Jimi Hendrix. Yeah, because there's a full spectrum of sound that goes along with that.
And I'm going to go one wine that isn't yours, but that first Amarone you had, the Mossy, that was that aha moment for you.
La Traviata. Yeah, it's going to be, that wine sang, and it would definitely be something operatic.
Well, I could play this all day with you. We'll just go through wines and you tell me music because, that you're good at that. But I want to know, what wine region is at the top of your bucket list to visit next?
Santa Barbara County. Absolutely.
You have to explore your own region?
And that's what's really, really strange is that, in the beginning of my career, I really prided myself on knowing every vineyard that was in Santa Barbara County and visiting each one and tasting all the wines that I could and being as involved. And, when I first moved here, there were 24 wineries in Santa Barbara County.
And now there are
over 400, and so I've lost track. And to be honest with you, the one place I never get to go and roam around the countryside and taste wines and do all the things that I do in other places is here. And so, and I still think, I got to make wine, like I said, down in Argentina and up in Washington State, and I've had the honor of making wine in Italy as well. And each time that I've gone to those places, I thought, wow, I'm going to learn a lot about Argentina, or I'm going to learn a lot about Italy. And what I learned the most about is that this is a perfect place to make wine. And it has far fewer maladies and obstacles to making wine than any of those other places that I've worked in. And so it really built my appreciation for the fact that I get to make wines here. And that may sound kind of trite or sickly sweet, but it's the truth. So,
Steve, I could talk to you all day, but we're going to have to end this. You have waxed poetically about this place, and as it's a place you want to explore, obviously this is a place that we should invite all of our listeners to explore.
Absolutely.
So come here to Santa Barbara Wine Country and check out all there is. But if they want to come taste Palmina and all the wonderful Cal Italian varieties, how do they find you?
Well, we're at 2982 Grand Avenue in Los Olivos, and proud to be here. We have a tasting room in Lompoc, romantically located in what we call the wine ghetto. And that's at 1520 East Chestnut Court in Lompoc. Go to palminawines.com, and our website will lead you to our two different places, tell you about our wine club and different tasting opportunities, and it even lists out some of the places where you can find us in restaurants.
Great. And if you join the wine club, you get invited to a lot of really cool events where Steve makes pizza.
That pizza, right now I'm making pizza every Saturday in Los Olivos. But the other fun thing is every single bottle of wine that I release through Palmina, for our wine club, I supply a recipe for it. So rather than giving kind of general ideas of what I would pair it with each wine that I produce, I create a recipe specifically for it. And so that recipe comes with your newsletter in the wine club shipment. And a lot of people have collected them over the years. We have over 400 recipes that we've put out. And so that part's really fun for me too.
Well, Steve, thank you for joining us today on Wine Soundtrack, and I'll pick up my glass here so that we can do a little cheers, and it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.